Yeah, I know she asked us about doing the meeting at 7:30 instead of 7 when we were originally booking
Yeah.
it. So I was guessing she had something running, but I'll shoot her a quick text
Mhm.
message.
Sounds good.
Well, you got 15 people in there already.
Yep. Okay.
Naz, can you resend her the link?
Resend her the link? Certainly.
Yeah.
Hang on 1 second. If my... Okay, so that... Okay. Alright, I just sent it now, so...
Great.
Okay. Okay. There she is. She's coming in right now.
Great. Hey, Leah.
Oh, yep. I'm going to ask her to unmute.
Howdy.
Hey there. Okay, so we have the members of the committee. It is 7:34, and I will call the meeting to order. First up on the agenda is resident comments. Before we jump into resident comments, I would just ask as a reminder for everyone, if your comments relate to specifics relating to the proposed election plan, I would ask that you email those to the committee inbox, vmaelections@martinseditions.org, since that's the only way that we will be able to make sure that your comments are appropriately shared with the council to help with their deliberations as they consider amendments relating to the election plan. And then the last thing I would just ask before we jump into resident comments is if your comments are extensive or heavily detailed. We have a lot of residents on the call tonight. Just as a courtesy to the other residents, please consider whether some of the details in your comments would be something that would be better or would be appropriate to email to the committee, or would potentially be something that could wait until later in the meeting, just to make sure that where possible, this is something where we're going to make it so everyone who has an interest in sharing their comments has the opportunity to speak, just as a courtesy to the other residents who might want to weigh in with something. I just ask that you keep that in mind as you kind of formulate your comments and share them with the rest of the village. So, having said that, resident comments. If you would like to do the comment, either raise the hand on Zoom or raise your hand on just physically in your video window, and Niles will unmute you.
All right. I first saw Marty, so we'll start there and then go to Naomi afterwards. So.
Okay, thank you, and welcome. It's nice to see so many folks here. Elections are important, and there's a lot of matters of principle here at stake. I think that people really care about it. We're a self-governing community, and I'm very pleased that people in my institutions take that seriously. So thank you to the election committee. I do want to ask a question about format. Until the last election committee meeting, the one on January 6th, the committee meetings were run in what I call an inclusive format, where people could comment on each piece of the regulation as it came up, on each topic, item by item. And when you're talking about regulations, that's the productive way to do it. Limiting residents' comments to the beginning and end of the meeting is really much less helpful to the committee, and it puts the audience in kind of a awkward position, an uncomfortable position of kind of being the audience for a show rather than participating in our democracy. And so I wanted to ask George, as the new chair of this committee, to go back to the previous format, which is also the format the council's been using this year, and makes for a much more productive public meeting, where residents will in fact be able to comment as you go through the agenda on each agenda item. I know that people may have some feelings about the communications calendar, and the action items that are on your agenda aren't specified, but I'm sure people will have comments on those. And so my question is one about format. Let's do the more participatory, democratic, open format of having discussions as we go through the agenda. Can I get a yes on that, George?
So first off, I'm going to say, just to anyone who was not on the last call, if I am looking off this direction, it's because I have a second screen, and that's where I'm taking minutes and notes for the meeting. I'm very much paying attention. No, Marty, I think we're going to stick with the format of having open resident comment periods where the residents are free to make comments on any of the items on the agenda. And then once we move into kind of committee work session, then we're not going to be fielding resident comment during the period of committee work session.
All right, let me talk about that for a moment, if I could, because that is, number one, much less participatory, and this is an issue which obviously has a lot of community interest. Number two, it's a practical matter. Having been in your seat of running this committee, I found it very, very helpful to have residents' comments on specific items. When you're talking about regulations, you really want people to be able to speak up as you're dealing with each topic. It's not helpful for the committee or the community to have the sort of agenda kind of undefined. I mean, action items aren't listed here. And then at the end, once you've voted on those action items, it's too late for you to have the community's input. And you end up being criticized by the community, well, why didn't you do X, Y, Z? When in fact, you could have had a better outcome, a more complete, more informed decision if you'd allowed the community to speak up as you go through the topics item by item. It's just, when you're dealing with regulations, it's particularly more practical. And it's helpful to the committee, so I'd ask you to reconsider that and to recognize that community residents may have really good, important information for you item by item, and wait until after the end puts you in a bad position of people criticizing you because you didn't give them a chance to speak up as you were going through the items. I mean, it's just common sense, it seems to me, George. So I'm going to ask you to really reconsider that and make it a more participatory format, especially because there is so much continuing concern about this. And we have a lot of expertise. People like Elizabeth and Jeffrey M. Goldberg. I mean, Jeffrey supervised elections for, 30 or 40 years. There's a lot of expertise. Gene Sperling knows a lot about Martin's Editions elections going back all the way to 1985 and even before that, when we were a taxing district in 1916, we had elections, and Gene shared some of that history with me. So, again, I think it's a procedural and practical mistake for the committee to stick to a format that deprives you of that expertise. And I would ask you to please reconsider as we go through this meeting and recognize residents' contributions, because they may be very helpful. And it's also, I'm an economist, I like efficiency. It's more efficient to let people discuss it item by item. So again, I would ask you to reconsider format. The election committee, prior to your taking the chair, did use that open forum. The council has given us a good role model for that more participatory forum. And that's a matter of principle. We're a participatory democracy. I think the election committee especially needs to welcome participation as we go through topic by topic. So please reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Now, is it Naomi?
Yeah, I asked her to unmute, so just take a second.
So I want to know, George, if having asked for community comments by email, whether this committee is going to consider all the items that were submitted. Can you look at the screen so you can look at us? I'm not sure you're looking at us, but is your intention to run this meeting to include the input that 22 residents have already submitted on the plan that you developed on January 6th? And will you consider those items that were submitted by over 20 residents to adjust, to accommodate, to edit, to integrate into the plan that you developed with only 3 committee members on January 6th? Or can you commit to be more inclusive and include 7 times as many residents' comments on this plan? Yes or no?
So, Naomi, again, I'm not, if I'm looking up and to the left, it's because I'm trying to take notes to make sure I'm capturing who's speaking and what they're saying. I am very much still listening. With regard to the resident comment, the resident comment period is not over. I'm going to say this now, and I'm also going to add it at the end of the meeting. Resident comments, we're encouraging people to send in comments through the 10th. Those comments are being bundled and sent to the council for their consideration as they debate amendments to the election plan as enrolled. The committee is, the agenda for tonight does not include amendments to the election plan because it has already been introduced at the council level, meaning amendments to the election plan is going to happen by the council, not by the committee tonight. I can say, I can't speak for the other 2 committee members, but I can say I have read the comments that were shared, that have all come in. They have all informed. I have considered them. They have informed my thinking on a lot of these issues. So those are under my, I can speak for myself. I can't speak for how the council's approaching it, but I can say it's not currently on the agenda to discuss those proposed edits because they are edits to the plan that is with the council, and therefore it's more appropriate for the council to consider making those changes because there's not amendments that would be made at this point by the committee.
Paul, that is just not good enough. The 3 of you are only 3 people in the village. There are many more of us who have input into the plan, and I don't understand why you're selecting a procedure that does not include our comments, having asked us to submit comments by email. So I don't understand why that would not involve your discussion tonight. Otherwise, what is the point of all us being on this meeting?
So George, if I can jump in real briefly.
Yep.
Procedurally speaking, Naomi, it is now in the hands of the council, and I've taken on the job of compiling every single comment that has come into the inbox of the election committee, and I'm putting together a document that will reflect every single comment. But procedurally speaking, it is now a council deliberation on how to reflect all of those comments and to integrate the comments that were provided by it's more than 20. It's the signatories of the letter that you were a part of, and many more. And some comments, I'm not going to speak out of turn here, but some comments basically support a lot of the things that was reflected in your letter. Other comments add additional items of concern or interest, and some question some of the comment. It reflects the entire community, not the 3 committee members, but all the community members that care about this process. And so procedurally, this is where it is now. That's nothing that we can change, or I mean, I guess, you know, anything can be changed, but that's where it is procedurally speaking.
But I don't understand, what is the point of the meeting tonight if not to discuss that plan?
So, Naomi, I can speak to that. The point of the meeting tonight is for the committee members to discuss action items, steps forward on the items that are listed out on the agenda, most of which are geared around the steps that we need to take to begin executing the election. The election plan is still being discussed by the council, so details of that are still up in the air, but we know at some point in the next few weeks, the nominations period is going to open. We're going to discuss the activities that the committee members need to take to get the nomination period open and to begin the work of actually executing and running the election, and for the committee members to discuss the items on the agenda.
Just for procedural purposes, action number 3 on the agenda says comments on the 2022 proposed election plan.
Yeah, that actually, if you look at comments on the 2022 election plan action items, that refers to the actions that the committee still needs to take relating to the comments that have been shared. So it is, and this is jumping the agenda slightly ahead to what that will cover, but that is the actions that the committee is going to need to take, which are going to include sending out a message tomorrow, reminding people of the deadline for getting comments in, and ensuring that the comments have been properly bundled and shared with the council for their consideration. So it relates to the actions that are needed to be taken in accordance with the process that was agreed to in January, that we were going to open the comments for everyone in the community and then make sure that all of the community comments are aggregated and shared with the council so it can inform their consideration. So that's what that agenda item refers to. Okay. I think that's
So yeah, it's Goldberg's.
Goldberg.
Yeah, it's both.
Jeffrey Goldberg. Good
Thank you,
evening.
Jeffrey.
I'd like to go on record as saying I don't want to see the election committee be a playground of dysfunction. I'd also like to say, as Lewis Carroll said in Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. We haven't the faintest idea what comments you received, how many, and what they said. Your bundling them up is wonderful. How about sharing the comments with the people who called in today? As to transparency, it seems the transparency of the election committee is similar to the open-air prison in Xinjiang province in China. Are we putting our volunteers from the village in re-education camps? Or are we sharing contributions with them? Are we making their work easier or hard? When are you going to put the cameras on us? Tell us what you received.
And thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm asking Susan to
Paul?
unmute. Yeah, Susan Kahn. Mm-hmm.
George, I should state my position at this point as a member of the committee. We had several very productive meetings at the beginning of this whole process. We came out on December the 16th with a plan that our full committee of 5 people voted to put forward. With 2 amendments. One amendment was voted on, one was not at that time. That's the draft that I, as a committee member, support. I think the December 16th plan included many of these comments that have been made by the 22 or so participants, constituents, if you will, since that time. I was surprised that there were edits made to that December 16th plan, and that those edits went forth to the council as the final plan, and that's when the 22 people plus came through and said, wait a minute, we don't support many of these, and we need to have input into them. So my position is that I would not vote for a plan that was not a party to the December 16th plan.
Hey, Paul, before we drop into that conversation, because I think that's getting into committee business, are you okay if we wrap up any resident comment before we start doing committee business?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So now I'm going to ask.
I have another question, if I might.
Marty, before we loop back to you, I think we have some other people who haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Absolutely.
So as long as you're okay with that, I would defer to, or try to allow people to speak for, get their first time in before we loop back for any resident comments. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
So Susan,
For iPad?
no, the person that was up before them was Susan Kahn. Sorry, I just unmuted
Okay,
her,
sorry.
and then oh, did you, Susan? You just here. I'm going to ask you to unmute again. Sorry, you were on mute.
Okay, with iPad going first.
Okay.
Hi, this is Tiffany Cisna. I just wanted to say, I appreciate that there's a resident comment period, and I have submitted comments to both the committee and the council during the process. I appreciate Andrew clarifying where the legislative language is now and where to direct any additional comments that I might have. And I also I understand you guys are volunteering, and I appreciate, just your time. I know that having these meetings, taking resident comments, and then being able to do your business and wrap up timely is important, because if not, we start to lose interest and we lose volunteers. And I think it's really great. Paul has been in the village for many years, and Leah and George are relatively new. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that.
Thank you, Tiffany. Susan was up next, yes?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I was going to just say, as the election committee and the council move forward with finalizing an election plan, I wanted to mention just a few values that seemed important. And these contrast with simple efficiency and rushing through a set of election events. For instance, in the TV show American Ninja Warrior, the contestants have to rush through a series of events, jumping through hoops and leaping over pools of water and climbing walls quickly while a clock ticks away. And an election can be efficient, but it doesn't have to be rushed and fast, like this very discussion. And to be successful in allowing people to make a well-considered choice, I think it's important to build into the schedule time for new candidates to become known to villagers. So making sure residents can meet candidates and talk to them or hear them in the forum and get mailings about their position statements before they get mailings with the ballots that they return, that to me seems like a good idea. I would encourage you not to rush. When I say you, I mean the council or the election committee, as you all think about your plan, not to rush the schedule, because doing so may tilt the election toward incumbents who are already known to residents, or may make it hard for newcomers to enter a race. So if we take as a value that we should not rush the election, but rather focus on making the most even and level playing field for newcomers, run by an independent election committee, then these things should follow. I think we should avoid having 2 dates for making nominations and turning in candidate statements. Doing so creates unnecessary extra deadlines. Have a 30-minute grace period, which the election committee decided to include for turning in candidate materials. You all voted on that. It was a great idea, and thank you for including that. Have the election committee have the ultimate responsibility for the voter roll. They can work with the village manager on it, but they're ultimately responsible for reviewing and signing off on the roll. And schedule the forum for candidates so residents hear their views before ballots are mailed to people. And then send the paper candidate statements to people's houses, those mailings, to people, and the instructions for voting before they receive ballots so that they get to know candidates first. And mail ballots so that they will arrive at people's homes after the forum and paper candidate statements arrive, or as close to the same day as possible. So, and finally, ensure that the date for the ballots to be returned to the vendor and the date for the ballots to be counted are several days apart. So a time to cure some ballot envelopes is built into the schedule, and votes get counted instead of torn up. It should be taken as a point of pride that in a community of neighbors, as small as we are, that every vote that's sent in is counted. If it takes several more days to ask about a smudged signature or damaged envelope, that's okay. The value that should be stressed foremost is doing what's best for candidates and voters who deserve to have votes counted. When discussion centers mainly on doing something before or after a spring break from school, or before or after one or another holiday, then it's important to remember that as meaningful as those dates are for residents, and those dates can still be considered, at the same time, the election committee is tasked with being consistently mindful of the effect of the calendar dates on candidates and voters, all of whom are also residents. Greater fairness may be ensured by building it into the calendar dates. So, for instance, we would want to deliver ballots later in the election cycle to ensure residents have a chance to learn about candidates and hear them in a forum and see their statements in the mail before they're expected to send back ballots. This also reduces the chances they'll misplace ballots that could otherwise sit around homes for weeks. This is not an American Ninja Warriors TV show. It's an election in a community of neighbors where we should encourage residents to become candidates, where we should allow residents the opportunity and time to hear from new candidates and incumbents, and where we should allow residents to cure ballots when they're easily contacted through information on an envelope. And this is my last paragraph. Whether you're on the election committee or the village council, I encourage you to accept each of the amendments in the resident's letter to add to the election plan. It was signed by 22 people and counting. Ideally, you would use the December 16 election plan with minor adjustments, which I support Paul Weller's idea. If you choose not to, then the January 6th election plan should at least include these fundamental amendments that are in line with years of tradition for VMA elections. These amendments will strengthen the provisions of the election plan to ensure the village conducts a fair election for voters with an independent election committee. Our goal should be to create an even playing field for new candidates and an election which allows villagers to express their preferences in a fair and honest way, and to ensure their votes are counted to the extent possible. Thank you very much for your time, George, and Leah, and Paul, and everyone on the call.
Thank you, Susan. Niles, did we have any other resident comments? Oh, sorry, and Marty, I will make sure we come back to you, but I wanted to see if there's anyone else who had a comment first.
Not that I'm aware of right now.
Okay, seeing no one. Marty?
All right.
Thank you. A couple of questions. On the agenda for tonight's meeting, the action items are not specified. And the last committee meeting on January 6th, there were 12 votes, none of which were specified in the agenda ahead of time. It's really hard for residents to comment when we don't know what the action items are. If you're going to continue in the future to use this less participatory format where we can't speak during the course of the topic-by-topic discussions we have, would you at least agree in the future to list the action items very specifically so that we can speak to them before you vote? Speaking of them after you vote at the end of the meeting doesn't do much good for anybody. Do you have any other action items tonight besides the two you mentioned?
there are action items within the communications calendar planning and things like that that are part of committee administrative business.
Well, when it comes to an election, administrative decisions often have electoral consequences. The Open Meetings Act talks about, like regulatory decisions versus administrative actions, but you have to be really careful on the election stuff because administrative actions can have major electoral consequences. So, I can only recommend that all meetings be open and everything be treated as if it were regulatory because, in fact, that may be its impact. Go to the communications action items, which is a communications calendar, I guess. I would like to add an important point. This comes from the experience last year where we had, for the first time ever, as far as I know, 4 residents disqualified. They lost their right to vote because they messed up the envelope signature. And that's the first time in my knowledge that that's ever been done, that we've actually penalized people by taking away their right to vote, which does seem to me to be a pretty harsh penalty for an envelope being screwed up. And again, I would recommend that that not be done. But when you have communications, part of the election committee's responsibility under the charter is civic education. And the need to really, if there are going to be residents who lose the right to vote, which is pretty darn sacred, if residents are going to be denied their right to vote because of an envelope screw up, a lack of a signature or anything else, I think it's really incumbent on the committee to emphasize that in your communications up front before people ever even get the ballot, to really educate people that their fundamental right to vote depends on them filling out that form correctly. And really the instructions need to be much clearer. They need to be mailed, not just online. And I think that civic education component didn't get done in 2021. And the result was that some people lost their right to vote. And that's a pretty serious penalty. So I would ask that you look at your communications very carefully and take community input on communications into consideration and include in that civic education to really help people not get disqualified by what I consider arbitrary and fairly trivial envelope problems. The right to vote should not be removed lightly.
Thank you, Marty. Are there any other resident comments? Okay. Hearing none, then we will move to the committee's agenda. So, first item on the agenda is, as I mentioned earlier, the comments on the 2022 proposed election plan action items. Leah and Paul, this is, as I mentioned, I think there's functionally just kind of 2 action items that we as a committee just need to make sure are being done, and that is sending out a reminder tomorrow. I'm happy to put together the language for that, but just sending out a reminder to the village, again, saying we're accepting comments on this that will be sent to the council. Please send in your comments by this date to be emailed up, or you can attend the council's next meeting when they are when they are handling further consideration of the election plan and its adoption, and make your comments then. And then the other one is just doing after the deadline on Thursday, just doing the sweep and making sure we've got everything bundled and sent up to the council, so that way they've got it for their consideration and they can make any determinations on how they are sharing it internally, how they are sharing those as part of the council packet, things like that. Do you guys see any other action items that you see are outstanding relating to the resident comments on the proposed election plan?
Not that I'm aware of.
I would support those action items, George. Yes.
Okay. I will take the pen on putting together the draft language. I think it's going to be pretty almost identical to the stuff that went out when we opened the comment period, but I would, just the small tweak of, instead of over the next few weeks, just changing it to in the next 2 days, trying to get it. But I think we're up to date on all the resident comments that have come in, have been shared thus far with the council. I think it's helped greatly that almost all, and Andrew can probably attest to this, almost all of the resident comments that have come in thus far have all CC'd the council members on the submission email anyway, so they already had, I think, a lot of the comments that come through, but I will do another double check if either of you want to log into the committee inbox at some point over the next few days and just help me second set of eyes and sanity check to make sure that everything's been sent up. But to the best of my knowledge, when I did a sweep through it this afternoon, all the comments had been forwarded that have come in thus far. Okay. Just let me. Okay. Anything else on the comments that came through? Okay. Next up, so before we do, I was actually would flip 4 and 5 and do proposed communications packet, Paul, and turn it over to you, and then once we get through that, then we can talk calendaring. Is that okay?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
You want to go with the communications packet? Is that what?
Yeah, the conversation around the packet that you had raised, wanting to discuss.
Well, the packet that, I support strongly the education of the voter portion, and I think the packet should be a very forward and effective covering memo from the election committee, from the committee. I think the committee needs to keep the keep the initiative here. Actually, until a final council vote is made on it, but I think the committee needs to stay in charge here. And so number one would be a very forward covering letter that attached is the proposed election plan. With that, we will work out together as a committee. And then beside that would be a very detailed list of dates and the importance of each of those dates for the constituent, the resident, in order to be a part of that plan. Those are the major three things that I saw that we really need to do to send out to these people. Make it as simple as possible, but as informative as possible. So I'm open to any other suggestions, but I think that the covering letter, the plan itself, and then the list of dates and action items that must be done before the election itself.
So, Paul, when you talk about including the proposed election plan, by that point it would be a finalized election plan, right? Because the packet also normally includes the candidate statements, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
In other words, it's what the council has finally accepted.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially with the candidate statements. I know that is a packet, and I know it's also the other one. I think Niles and I briefly talked about earlier this week, which is starting to get these materials ready, because not only do they go into the packet, they also go into the election website, which Leah, I know being new, I did not know this until we did the election last year. We have the committee webpage, but then there's a separate election page that is where the candidate statements are posted. I think during the nomination period, that's where we put the conflict of interest form that any nominees would have to fill out. We put all that there, and I think, that would definitely help to make sure that page is as explicit as possible of here are the dates, here are the dates during the nomination period, and then when the nomination period closes, it's here are the dates of, here's when the forum's scheduled, here's when your ballot should be arriving.
Right.
Here is, you know, when to drop your ballot off, here is when it needs to be at the election vendor by. And I think all that would, yeah, that makes sense, is the packet and the website kind of going concurrently.
George, is that website up at all times, or is it?
Right. So yes, so I can answer that question. So the website is up at all times. In fact, last year it still shows. I still have last year's information on it right now, but it will be, so you can kind of get a sense of what it looks like. And then all that will be stripped out. New things will be put up for this year's election. But if you go to our website, and then you go to governance, and it's called council elections, and you'll see sort of what was done last year as sort of an example. This was after the nomination period had closed. This is when there are candidates. So this was an example. But then it gets up. We refresh it. Put in the dates for this time and everything, and you can sort of just do it that way. And whatever other information the committee needs to add.
Okay, and so you update the website, Niall?
So I update actual uploading. The committee writes it. All the information gets put there. I just literally have access to the website, and we'll paste it in and make sure that it comes out okay. All the technical things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, George. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so that's where I think that would be useful for, this communication stuff, where during the nomination period, the stuff, front and center is, here's the nomination period information if you would like to nominate yourself, if you would like to nominate someone else, here are the requirements, here's the resources. And then once we get into the campaign period, I guess it would be called, then the focus on the page shifts more to, here are the dates for the campaign period. I think last year it included like some of the ballot instructions of, this is what your ballot is going to look like. That might have just been in some of the email messages. That was in the email messages, but we could put that there too. I mean, we can put what we did last year is we had a picture of what the envelope looked like. So you could say, here's exactly what you'll get in the mail, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that way, be looking out for this. Don't just toss it in the junk mail, along with, as Paul talks about, kind of some of the civic education piece of walking people through, when you get your ballot, these are the, this is what you need to do on the back to make sure you're signing it. This is kind of all this stuff, along with all of the candidate statements go there as well, along with the kind of key dates and information. So I think all of that makes sense as the packet. I think that's something that it's an action item for us to make sure we get the language ready to go up on the website for the nomination period. Because I think we have an email goes out to everyone, it goes into the Friday newsletters, and then we also would want to be updating the website, and where we're going to start pointing a lot of the communications to find the necessary resources, go to this webpage kind of thing and such. And so I know, Leah, you were taking kind of first pass at the email language, and I think it's probably going to be really, and I'm happy to help with that as well. I think that's going to be very, very similar to the language that goes up to the nomination section for the election website. I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball on that. I tried to get in, and then when I couldn't, work took over. But I'll get back to that tomorrow.
And I think the other one is, currently, with the timing, Nas, correct me if I'm right, the council meeting is February 17th.
Correct.
The nominations period is currently under the plan, and admittedly they can amend it. The nominations period currently opens on the 18th, so that is not a lot of time, but I think we can start writing it and then just have kind of placeholders with blanks for the dates, and then once we have the plan, then it is just the mere act of, okay, we don't need to super heavily rewrite the dates portion and just kind of plug in and say, okay, the dates are right or the dates need to be updated accordingly. But I think, those are Paul, I think you hit on the the big elements that we would want to make sure go into that packet, and we want to make sure are up on the website. I think. Yeah, sorry. So we need the candidate statements. We obviously won't have yet. The plan. We have draft version, so we're going to need to draft the cover letter, and we're going to need to draft kind of the dates and the importance of the dates. It sounded like.
Importance is very, very much part of it. Yes.
Okay. Paul, Leah, do either of you? So it sounds like we've got those two action items. Do either of you want to take point on either cover letter or the date / importance of the dates framework? I don't think it needs to be like a formal doc because it's going to get something that the three of us can look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be shared by among the committee and let the committee make any changes to the cover letter. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be all of us editing. It's more of, does anybody want to take pen on writing the first draft that then we all start editing, or?
Right. I would like to stress be in charge of this and not the council until the council finally gets the final package and approves it, amends it, or because anything other than that, to me, is a conflict of interest. Where the elected officials decide the issues and the points. So, and I think we're on the same page on that. You know. And that's part of what the problem was I saw on the January 6th is it seemed to me that the importance of the committee was not brought forward. In the edited version.
Hey, I'll take lead on drafting the dates, important dates thing, and having that shareable. I'll do the cover letter. Leah's doing the announcement email, just so that way we can make sure that's getting covered, and then we'll move, and then we'll discuss. Okay. Okay.
Or on a side note, I really appreciate your leadership.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
George, have you heard anything more about the council actually beefing up the committee while we were in the working process? I mean, we could two really good people that were knowledgeable and I feel their loss. I really do in this whole thing. Is that something that's going to be in the future?
Go ahead, Andrew. You can.
Yeah, Paul, good question. And we did discuss this, among the council, and we agreed that we'd like to beef it live again, and that's why there was a call for volunteers, a formalized process just to help consolidate everyone who's interested. I think Niles put something out last week. We're going to put out another reminder tomorrow. We set a deadline for Monday, I think, of the council meeting, so that we can hopefully appoint, and again, based on this council's initial recommendation to beef up these committees at the very beginning, get back to 5. So we're totally in agreement, and hopefully we'll have those 2 additional volunteers on in a matter of a week.
That would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
And Andrew, I know the charter allows for it. I don't know about past practice for it, but I know the charter also says that council can up people to basically be day of support if we do wind up, having a little bit more of kind of an event for the ballot drop off on that is something that I know in the past the council was able to appoint kind of basically, I think they're called like assistant or associate members who are just kind of election day support to help man the table, etc. And so
I haven't reviewed that, but I think we can base that on the recommendation of the committee. If you feel like you need more arms and legs, I think that would make total sense. And again, because there's sensitivities as relates to balloting and all that, I feel like the council would probably want the committee to make that call in appointing. Maybe we have to procedurally do that, but I think we'd want to do that based on the recommendations coming from the committee.
And thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's going to be something that, we'll probably get a better sense of as we get close to election day and we see whether or not things are clearing up enough that we're actually having an event versus it's a little bit more of kind of the box is there and we really don't need a lot of extra, a lot of extra bodies there. Okay, so that covers those portions of it. Paul, I did want to loop back to the concerns you were raising relating to the draft that was sent up to the council and the council has introduced. Anyway, so to watch language on that, but the council has introduced and is currently considering amendments to it.
So it was there are about 6 points. Do you want me to go over those quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've already brought up the fact the reference to the committee's importance, the legal responsibility of the committee, not the council, in this process. That is put back in the language pertaining to ballot curing. I wasn't part of this last year, and I wasn't fully appraised, I guess, in the process here that people were eliminated from becoming, nominees, or for, and so it's important, I think, that we have the ballot curing, that we have an opportunity to get back to the person that's being nominated. Number 3 would be the authority of the election committee to distribute candidate announcements and statements by multiple means, not just by mail. I was the one that suggested that we have a drop box, if you will, at the council office. From the very beginning, I've had a concern about the location of the council office, not very disability oriented, to get people up to the top of the steps. So I was saying a lockbox of some type down at the bottom at the sidewalk. But anyhow, that's debatable, and I accept the people's final position on that. We need to eliminate opportunities to cure the envelope errors. That seems to be so minor to me, but we have to have an opportunity for us as a committee to go back to those potential nominees and see if we can cure that. And then finally, I think that we need to put language in there that the election committee has the sole discretion to resolve the objections to the ballot counting process. You're going outside to a contractor. The committee needs to maintain full control of that process, and that needs to be a part of the plan. Those are some of the things that I think that need to be a part of this whole process.
Okay. So I think I would add really quick. So, Paul, when you were talking about putting the language back in relating to curing, you were talking about, you said ballot curing, but then you for candidates being potentially disqualified. I think we voted on at the January meeting. We voted on adding in, I think it's a 1-day period where we said if somebody's nomination materials are deficient, we've got a day where we can get back to them and say, hey, you didn't sign the conflict form, or your candidate statement is 510 words and we said it should be 500,
No.
etc. I think that's in there. Or are you talking about ballot curing where people send in their ballot envelopes and the ballots weren't signed? And that's a separate thing.
Well, I guess then I'm talking about both. I guess.
Okay.
I'm talking about both.
Okay. So I think we have a process that's written in for curing potentially deficient candidate materials. That's already in there. So and we have, we said, yeah, it's gonna be 24 hours, and that's, I think it specifically carves out an exemption of even if you sent it in, say, that you're not hit by the deadline, it's still 24 hours from there to fix that, so I think that seems addressed. For the ballot envelopes, that was, a big part of our discussion in the December meeting. We're not doing ballot curing for unsigned envelopes. And enough for ballots that have been where two members of the same household have swapped envelopes, smudged things, all that stuff. All of that is stuff that we have the authority, or we have the opportunity at the committee where we can choose to accept that on election night. We can't create like a blanket rule. That was the guidance we got from Ron last year, was everyone has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But we have the authority where if we had gotten one that, where it's in the wrong envelope, et cetera, we don't necessarily need a multi-day curing process because we can just address it on the night.
It wasn't apparent to me, but I'm glad we have the authority to do that. It wasn't apparent. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and like I said, the one that we did get was, the guidance from Ron that we can't do blanket rules saying we will decide this way, but we can. So we have to address them all on kind of like a one-by-one basis, just under the law. You brought up election committee distributing candidate statements via multiple means. I don't think the plan actually precludes that. It says 4, but that's not we're only doing one. I'm in favor of sending it out multiple ways. That's more of my thinking on the 4 was, I know from last year and other conversations with Niles that not everyone wants it emailed to them. Not everyone wants a written packet sent to them. And so that just gives us the flexibility where we can, we're not on the hook where we're obligated to mail it to every single person. We are mailing it to the people who would like it mailed to them.
Okay, it was an
mailing
and
it to the people
or.
who would like it emailed.
It's an and or change is what basically I think came through with that edit. So as long as we do have the authority to send it out, in more than one method. I'm not a strong supporter of the U.S. Postal Service. I'll tell you, I've had some really bad experiences. If that's the only way you're going to send them out or get them out, Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, Leah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I agree. I've been having some terrible experiences with USPS.
I mean, I don't know about the rest of it, but Raymond Street's not noted for good mail service.
On the flip side, I will say this: seeing as we moved here right at the beginning of COVID, it's been a decent way to get to meet some of my neighbors since we're having to show up on each other's porches a lot to trade mail. No, I think we're going to be served. We're going to want to send it out by multiple means. We're going to want to email it, have it on the website, have hard copies available in the village office.
I'm with you.
Mail it to the people who want it mailed to them. I think, Niles, you and I talked, I think that was originally changed where some people started opting out right at the beginning of COVID when we did not yet have the understanding that you weren't going to catch COVID from touching your mail, and some people wanted us to stop mailing them stuff.
People have had all kinds of different preferences versus email or mail or things like that. What we can do, we can mail things out to everyone, we can email them out to everyone, it's all just how we want to do it. Last year, there was, the plan and everything was mailed to everyone at the beginning of the process, but if you want the packet as well with the candidate statements mailed, that's a possibility, we can do it. So it's just a matter of how you guys want to do it,
Niles, do you have such a thing as a secure ballot box?
So we have an older box and sort of a general lock box. You just lock it and you have it. If
And lock it and
yeah.
keep control of it.
Right, yeah, and you can keep control of it. If we want to investigate something a little bit more, it's an older wooden box, like it's not the latest and greatest. We could, Gene's nodding, it's been there for years, I'm pretty sure. But we can investigate whether we want to look at what are some options for something a little bit more robust if you want, That's not a difficult thing. We bought for some other documents and such. We bought a fireproof, box. For that, we can look into see if there's a fireproof election box we can get.
Well, hopefully we won't have a fire.
Right. I was just using that as an example of something we can get. That's all.
That's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's one where reviewing the past election plans, reviewing the past practices, I think it seems from my review of all those that there's always been some procedures in place for people dropping off ballots early and then making sure they're secured, making sure they're not being handled by the staff, making sure they're not being handled by any council members. I know we've got a lockable election committee drawer, we've got the ballot box, and I think what we would probably want to do for the accessibility concerns is, and this has been asked for the committee members, but basically saying if you want to drop it off during the run-in period when the box would be up in the office, but have access and functional needs where you would need assistance, contact the committee and we will find a way where it's something where we find an agreeable time, the committee members go down and we physically carry the box down to the street so someone can put their envelope in and then carry it back up and re-secure it. So it seems like that's been the practice in the past has been, we've had the box there, we make it secure. I agree with Niles, having seen the box last year, we might want to think about upgrading to a slightly more robust model. Among other things, we might want a slightly bigger model to make sure that we're not having to, on election day, we're not having to empty it constantly because that box isn't terribly big. But
I have a shoebox.
but I think there's plenty of means that we can use to secure the ballots in the village office, make sure that they are safe. And we're also not talking about the drop box being available the entirety of the election period. I think when you had proposed the idea of having it out, it provides some flexibility by being out for a couple of days prior to the election, right? You might not be able to come on Tuesday night, but if we've got it out for Thursday, Friday, Monday, then one of those days you'll be able to find an opportunity. I think the other one that you had mentioned, the language in there that the election committee has sole discretion to resolve questions relating to the ballot process. I mean, yeah, I think that makes sense. It's going to be a decision that we make on the night. I will say that's one where last year it was really helpful getting a briefing from the village attorney about what kind of the legal requirements are relating to those objections, because there's certain things under Maryland state law that make that make sense. But I think that makes a lot of sense to that be included. As admittedly personal opinion, since that's something the council is going to be would need to change in their amendment process. But I'm sure Andrew has heard that comment raised, and that is part of the council's deliberations as they consider amendments to the plan. But I would also, throw my hat behind including that language.
Okay. I guess another idea would be to mail them to a secure secure post office box. I don't know, but those are things we can work those out as a committee. I think.
So, just a quick thing there, Paul. Just for people who are mailing in their ballot, if they're mailing in their ballot, what we've done is have them mailed to the service provider. So the service provider gets most of the ballots. So whatever drop box would be for people who either couldn't mail it in time and they want to drop it off at the office, and then we would either ship it to the vendor separately as like an overnight thing, or however we want to do that. Most of the ballots, which would be returned by mail, would be returned directly to the vendor. So that's where it would go that way. And then the vote counting was done by mail, or was done via Zoom, where they would show us any issues with the ballots. So that's where most of them would go, would be to their facility. And that was what was done in 2020 and 2021. So just the clarity there.
But the committee was the destination, the final destination, right?
The committee did in both 2020 and 2021. The committee did all of the adjudicating of ballots done via Zoom. All of the counting was done because they had the machines there, and whatever were done at the vendor's location. And then all of that, the physical material was mailed, well, really couriered. They had a direct person do it back to the village office after the election and after the results. So it was done. The actual voting was or the actual counting was done at the service providers. The service providers at the service provider's location. So, and then it was just that. So that's how it was done in the last 2 years with it. So the committee is sort of certifying the election, but they're not handling all of the ballots in that scenario.
Okay. I think the questions about the security of a box and how often you monitor it and so forth. And that's why I think people have a concern about having a drop box of sorts. But,
Right.
I think,
we have to be very careful about it.
yeah, I was gonna say, I know that's a concern. I think, this is something that's been done pretty much every other year in the village, where people have been able to drop off absentee ballots ahead of time, and
Right.
I have a lot of faith in the committee as constituted. The committee, once with additional members named by the council, if and when that happens, that we'll be able to pretty easily figure that out. It's something, it doesn't seem like it's something that's having to create a new process every other year. The ballot box was available where people could drop off their absentee ballots ahead of time, and we figured out how to do monitoring and checking it multiple times a day, and I think we're probably going to be able to pretty much just follow past practice on that.
Okay.
And I think, and like I said, it shouldn't be a huge burden on the committee for going down, checking it, making sure it's being emptied, and we're counting how many things are in there, because like I said, it's not going to, I wouldn't envision it being out for a really long period. I would envision putting it out for a couple of days during the run up to election day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, those are my major concerns that went over. So.
Okay. I hope, yeah, my responses were helpful and informative on that, and maybe allay some of your concerns.
Very knowledgeable. I salute you.
Lisa, did you have any other questions you wanted to raise relating to the election plan?
Not really. I guess I'm curious, I thought I had heard or read that, didn't ballots used to be collected on the former committee chair's front porch at one point? Do you guys know about that?
That I don't know. Yeah, that if that happened, that was before my time.
Okay.
Gene is motioning no. That is not the case. So. Never happened.
It didn't happen?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on election plan?
All right.
So next up would be communications calendar. So I sent over a draft version of both the Word doc that I think we're going to want to populate out, and then the PowerPoint that is just purely a visualization to help kind of illustrate that I would envision communications kind of being, we're going to have something in every Friday roundup, we're going to have something in the monthly newsletter, and then there's also dates in which we're going to want to send out kind of, I called them special emails or standalone emails, where it's something where we want to be sending out standalone emails. The Word doc, which has kind of the date, what the intent is, and that's where I think I'll make sure that's something where all of us have kind of easy access to make edits to it, but that's kind of the live document for where we're gonna punch in the language that goes to Niles every week, so that way it's ready to be cut and pasted into the communications calendar, things like that. It's generally, based off my experience last year and just kind of common sense, I think it's generally pretty straightforward type stuff where it's using the same template a lot. You don't need, once the nomination period is open, you have kind of the announcement one, but then after that, it's kind of just every week is the nomination period is open. Please get your materials in by, get your nomination in by the 18th and your materials in by the 25th. And I think, so a lot of it's kind of templated stuff that we're going to want to go with, but I just figured I wanted to make sure we had a chance to see the calendar, we had a chance to discuss if you guys had any questions, concerns, ideas on how to do the calendaring work better. And then after that, I'll move into kind of some of the contingency discussions that I flagged in there. No questions? Okay. I think that'll probably be one as we get into putting the language together. I'm sure there will be some questions that crop up and things like that that will be pretty easy, pretty smooth just to deal with. But it's pretty straightforward. It's mostly just we want to keep up a pretty regular stream of communication to the village, explaining what is going on, what's about to be happening, and what people should be looking out for. There's a couple of things that aren't in the plan yet, but I think I had listed as kind of some contingency stuff for once we have candidates, we'll be able to make sure we can set a forum date. We'll want to start publicizing the forum as soon as possible. And once we have a vendor, we'll want to make sure we have kind of the dates on it, or the messaging relating to here's what the ballots are going to look like, here's what the ballot envelopes are going to look like, here's instructions, things like that. It does make sense. One of the contingency ones I wanted to flag was, I think I put them in as potential dates of what, if anything, we as a committee want to do if we are a week out from the nominations deadline and we have fewer candidates than there are currently council spots up for election. So basically, if we're a week out and we have 2 nominations, do we want to, Paul, in the Village of Chevy Chase plan that you had sent to the committee earlier this year, I think they have a provision where it automatically pushes the date back by a week. I think what I had done into the comms plan just as a draft was, if that's the case, we ramp up the messaging a little bit rather than changing deadlines on anything. Is just saying, if we don't have enough, okay, we're going to send out some extra emails reminding people of please volunteer to potentially serve on the committee. We would like to do this, but I did want to get your thoughts.
Has that
If that's something we should have a plan in place.
Do you anticipate, has that happened before?
I think there have been years where there's either, there haven't been enough candidates up until shortly before the election, or I think there's been a couple of years where it's been, where there were 2 people who had put in their process stuff for 3 spots, or where there had been 3 people for 3 spots. Do I anticipate it? Probably not. I mean, last year we had 6 people running for 2 spots, and so I think there's a strong civic mindedness of residents in the village. But I think it's a good contingency to cover of what do we want to do, so that way we're not making a decision in the moment.
Okay.
George, we have the authority, I think, to recruit. And how I got on the council the first time was that I was recruited. And I think the committee members should have, if they don't, but I think they do, have the authority to recruit the good people that serve. Some people have to be asked. So anyhow, that's a possibility too. So I think.
Yeah. I think that's also something to keep in mind. I leaned in favor of the increased messaging, just because it maintains kind of the both neutrality and the appearance of neutrality, and having kind of that locked in means we're not making a decision. There could be no accusation of bias of, oh, a week out there's only 2 candidates and the committee members didn't like those 2, and so they tried to push more for more people or anything. It's just saying, like, look, the rules are hard and fast. If we only have 2 and we're a week out, we're going to send out the extra emails to try and encourage people. I'm trying to think through last year. The committee never disclosed who any of the candidates running were, but I think a question arose for, and Tiffany can correct me in the resident comments at the end if I'm wrong on this, but I think during the nomination period, a question came up at a council meeting of if we were about what the nominations were looking like, and the extent of the statement was pointing out it seems like we're going to have a competitive election. We had enough people that we would have a competitive election, which I think, without disclosing who any of the candidates were, because we would never want to, until the period is done, we would never want to say, oh, we have Jane Doe and John Doe are both candidates and there are only 2. We would never want to say that. We would just want to say we only have, there's only 2 people up right now. So Paul, you said about maintaining we have the authority to recruit people. I think that's good. Do we want to do anything on the comms side? We can also just say comms messaging is going to be pretty clear, and we're going to set that plan in advance, and that's not going to change if we have fewer people than are up for current spots.
Right. Okay. Let me throw out a question that's been in my mind for quite a while, and that is, do you see the election committee coming up with a clean, new plan that incorporates many of these comments that have come in? You see us as a committee saying, we sent you to the council this plan, but now we've had input from several dozen of our constituents out here, and this is a revised plan. You see that happening?
I don't, but that's a large part of that is process, because at this point, like, edits to the plan are happening at the council level, because there's already been a version introduced, because the legal requirement is they have to introduce something and then they can make amendments to it, but it has to be introduced for 30 days. So I wouldn't anticipate us sending them a whole new plan. That's from a process standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I think I would add, I voted in favor of the plan in January because I was confident that, in my opinion, that was the right approach. And while there, a couple of small tweaks and edits to things that I think the council should consider, I think that's something that's easily addressable, or not easily, but is best served to be addressable by the council through their amendment process rather than us developing a new plan.
So you're saying that the final plan is totally in the council's responsibility now. So the committee, the election committee, basically is just overseeing maybe the comments that are coming in from a cross section of of residents, and the ones that I've seen. Somebody really has to take those and incorporate them, I would hope, into a final plan. Is that the council going to do that, or should the committee do that?
My understanding is that is a council responsibility. That is amendments to the plan as introduced is something that would have to be done by the council, because the plan has already been introduced. I think that's my understanding of the process. And again, going back to my personal one, I think the built a plan over several months and a lot of meetings and a lot of hard work, on those drafts, a lot of consideration, a lot of discussion on ironing out the details of that, and is how we ultimately arrived at the plan that the committee voted on in January. That has been sent to the council, it's been introduced, and so now my understanding is that that is now amendments to that plan is a council process rather than a committee process.
So,
Paul, just to be clear, even if it had been the December 16th plan that was ultimately voted out of committee, I think still procedurally speaking, the council would then have the ability to make changes or amendments to it, and I'm sure that's happened in the past. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't, but I think that's procedurally speaking what has happened in the past as well.
so do they?
And I don't know, just to finish that, I don't know if in the past residents even commented then or sent in comments. Hopefully they did. Now we have the benefit of all these comments and some of the institutional knowledge in those comments to help make a better product from our point of view, ultimately.
But why wouldn't that be the responsibility of the committee to put those pieces together? No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm just saying that it's handed to the council, and then I guess the council can do an up or down vote, I guess is one way to do it, you know. Or council members could say, hey, you know, I think maybe we should delay sending the ballots out if it's not in the plan. Or I think, you know, so I don't know if an up or down vote is the better way forward, but ultimately in the charter, I think the determination is once the election committee works through a plan and submits it to the council votes on it. And I don't know if in the past it's just been an up or down vote. Maybe someone who has institutional knowledge here can provide that information, or if changes had been made to those plans that were ultimately submitted.
Which is a better process, the committee doing it or the council doing it? Since we've had all this input now, after this plan was put forward, we've had all this input, and good input, really good input. And
I don't disagree. And so my question is, what if the council comes across a great election plan and there's no majority to vote in favor of it? If it's just an up or down vote, what do you do then? I mean, so I think the prerogative of the council has been, and please, folks, you can raise your hand if you have the experience. Gina, I'm looking at you or others. Maybe the council would then have, Jeffrey would then have said, I'd like to tweak this. Do we have a vote, a motion to make this or that change?
Marty, do you have any comments on that, Marty?
I do, but I think Jeff Goldberg does too, so I'd like to defer to Jeffrey and then come back if I may.
I'm asking him to unmute now, so mute you for 1 second. All right.
I'd like to first correct George. George said that 2 people were discharged from the committee. That's improper. The real term is constructive discharge in the Merit System Protection Board, the Equal Opportunity Board, the NLRB. That means that they were compelled to resign because of behavior. It's called constructive discharge. Number 2, what Paul is asking is really a new name for the committee. Call it the eunuch election. You have no balls to make any decision. Why don't you be up front?
So, moving past the second comment, Jeffrey, for the first comment, I don't remember saying previous committee members were discharged, but if I did, then that was obviously a misstatement. I was referring to, we had the previous 5 members of the committee, but I don't remember saying discharge of 2 members of the committee. But if I did, I apologize. That was obviously a misstatement.
I think they resigned. I saw their resignations.
Yeah. Marty, I think you were next for providing some insight into past activities of how this process was approached.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to discuss it. In 2015-16, that winter is when I first wrote the election ordinance, the regulations were in writing. Prior to that, we had very good, fair elections, I think, just didn't have written procedures. But under those written procedures, there was standard process, which was that the election committee was really responsible for doing the research and developing a good, solid election plan. And the council generally did not change or override that. Any changes that the council made in the election ordinance were done at the instigation of the election committee, where we saw something that needed to be specified or clarified. We would come to the council with a proposal, which the council would then adopt to amend the procedures. And so we had kind of a permanent set of procedures. That changed in April 2020 under the governor's pandemic waiver, when, to the complete surprise of the 2020 election committee, the council imposed new election procedures, not the plan that we had developed on the committee, and basically just overrode the committee. And there was a lot of council interference in that 2020 election. I think the results were accurate. The numbers were right, but it was not the kind of independent election we've normally had because of various council members interfering in the election management directly. And that's one of the issues that's come up again this year with the 2021 plan, where that clear firewall where the council's management of the election is really kind of a step back, hands off. They approve the overall procedures, but don't get involved in the day-to-day management. So what we've got this year is an interesting new situation. It's very different than what we had from 2015 up to 2020, where the council really didn't take action to define election plans. They approved the plan that the committee came forward with. They approved any changes in the plan the committee proposed. It was very collegial, it was very cordial, it was not contentious at all. But the council did not take the more active role we've seen this year in defining election procedures. They basically entrusted to an independent election committee to do that. And again, we had established procedures that were then overturned in 2020 in some ways that led to some pretty unfortunate election interference, which is all documented back in that June 29th, 2020 election memo, which I think you all have. Anyway, I think this is an unusual opportunity, but it's a good opportunity. This is the first chance we've really had as a community to talk about the 2021 election procedures versus the 2022, because last year's election committee didn't really have any open meetings about specific procedures. It didn't have any kind of public vote on the overall plan for 2021. There was really very little opportunity in 2021 for community residents, for the constituents, as I think some people have called this, to really weigh in on the election plan last year. It was kind of done and one and done, and boom, approved. And there was very little opportunity. There was no open committee meetings like we had this year, and I really appreciate the open meetings this year, because as you can see, there's a lot of interest in the community in having good election procedures. And I think there's a lot of community support, as Paul Weller has said, for the plan that was developed for the December 16th. And I think that the residents' strong response and good solid comments that were provided to the council and the committee in response to the January 6th changes largely did make recommended amendments to go back to the terms of the December 16th plan, which was better in many objective ways. It was better, more independent election. And the role of the council here is to approve the overall election plan. We used to call it the ordinance. It's not necessarily to get down in the weeds like you have had to this year. I think we do need to get down to the weeds this year because there is really significant community concern about that January 6th plan. And very strong community concern about the fairness of the election and the procedures and not setting up obstacles. All kinds of things. It's spelled out in the community recommendations. So yes, I would ask the council this year to really work with the committee and make those amendments. As Susan Kahn said, please adopt all the amendments. The residents gave you a lot of good information and the reasons for what they recommended. And going forward, I think next year, hopefully, we will not have to have this kind of discussion because we will have a good basic election plan again. Very much the way we did from 2015 through the spring of 2020. And I think we want to get back to that sort of standard permanent election manual, if you will. That's what we had. It was disrupted. Now we're doing some
Marty?
effort. Yeah, I got to go back to that. So thank you. This year, I
Thank you,
think is
Marty.
the exception.
Hey, do we have any other comments that can provide historical context related to the committee and council approach to addressing the election plan? And then I'm going to ask that we go back to finalizing some action items on the communications calendar.
So I'm just gonna unmute first, and then we'll go here. Hang on one second, Larry.
Well, I don't
Can-
have anything
Yeah,
specific to this. I'm waiting to speak
later.
So maybe I shouldn't say anything right
Yeah.
now.
Okay, sounds good. Let's pin that for later. Okay, so
All right, thank you, Larry.
and then let's go.
Hi, this is Tiffany Cisna. Why is this happening? Section 602 of the charter says the committee shall operate according to rules and procedures adopted by the council. It's very clear the council has to take the final action on what the committee does. I think Ron even mentioned, there's nothing in the charter, in the last council meeting, there's nothing in the charter that has to be recommended by the committee. There are procedures adopted by the council. And there have been times in the past where council has made changes to the procedures. So this is not the first time that this has happened. And some of those have to do with, doing an all-mail-in election for the first time, which was done in 2020. Never done before. Having a new manager, having new technology. So again, I think we're following what is in the charter, or the committee and the council are following what is in the charter. That this sits on the council's shoulders to adopt procedures, and the committee has to abide by them.
Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, so, Paul, I think, moving back, it seems like you were expressing kind of some concerns around whether or not we as a committee are going to send another plan of incorporating these comments. I personally, and I'm happy to put this to you, but I'm still confident in the plan we shared. I think we're taking a pretty good step in terms of providing an explicit process for residents to provide comment to the council. I know I have read the comments that have come through. I understand them. I respect where they're coming from. I disagree with them. In some respects, I agree with some of them. I think it's one where none of these were really new issues. These were all things that were pretty thoroughly discussed in our 5 previous open meetings. And we had opportunities for kind of residents to provide comments during all of those meetings. I think now we've got this additional way, but from a process standpoint, I think amendments at this point are happening in and among the council for them to amend the process, and I think we're providing a mechanism for people's comments to be organized and aggregated up alongside the recommendations that we, as a committee, discussed, voted on, incorporated into all of those drafts over the last several months. So I think this is, ultimately, we're going to wind up with a really good plan because it's been something that has been extensively discussed, and all of these issues have been considered at length both by the committee members and by the council.
But George, weren't many of these comments that came in by the 22 people in reference to the changes that were made in the December 16th draft? I think. I mean, not all of them, but many of them, I think.
So they were my understanding is their comments related to the draft that we discussed and voted on at our January 6th meeting. That draft, as you remember, was built, that was taking the initial committee draft that had been shared, that had been voted on by the committee, incorporating the changes that had been voted on at our November and December meetings by the committee, and then the 4 issues I think that the committee voted on at that meeting, where we said we're going to make these additional changes, and that was putting out the ballot box early. That was formalizing that we're gonna add a grace period. It was looking at the timeline for, when we're doing ballot counting. And the fourth one I'm blanking on, but I think it was, updates to the language relating to, when and how we're sending the ballots that are being dropped off in the drop box up to the vendors, and we're not looking at them before we send them up. That's what the January plan represents all of the previous drafts, just with the edits that we as a committee had voted on at our November, December, and January meetings. And now I know there are additional comments. Some of those are just comments that are things that we have not discussed before. Some of them are comments or things that we as a committee discussed at length, and ultimately voted on and made decisions related to those. And I think it's good. We've got resident comments. They're sending those comments up to the council. The committee has made our recommendations up to the council. So I think now it's, as Tiffany pointed out, in the charter, the council sets out the rules. So I think those recommendations have been have been all well presented to the council members, and they can now use that to inform their ultimate decision in how, when, and with what changes they adopt the election plan that we are going to be utilizing going forward in operating this election.
Well, I think what came out of that 22 person comment draft was that there were major changes that were made to the December. In other words, there were major changes that were edited after the committee met.
So I would point out, I mean, you saw the track changes version that I shared with you. There's changes made that reflected what we had previously voted on.
But Paul, you voted on it. Isn't this like neither here nor there at the moment because it's in the council's hands? I mean, I
think we're making a decision on, are we going to send an updated plan up to, that reflects those changes up to the council. I think, yeah, we've now discussed it at length. I would say if anyone has a motion that we would incorporate changes sent through any resident comments and send a new formal document up to the council, I'm more than happy to hear that motion.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
We don't have much of a committee, George. Let's face it. That's been my issue for many weeks. We don't really have a but I think what I'm trying to say is that what I saw and this thing was that there were a lot of people out there that said, wait a minute, we don't agree with this because we agreed with the December 16th version, and what was set up was not the December 16th, it was the January 6th, which made major change. And if you recall in that thing, here was a guy that was so uncomfortable on those votes because I wasn't really briefed. I should have been briefed. I should myself on what was going on there. I don't know. You're right, Leah. I voted for some of those. I voted for those, and I was very uncomfortable with it. And then I said we needed a minority plan. And look, when I got the 22-person thing, it looked to me like it was a majority plan, not a minority plan. And that's what bothers me now in this whole thing, George. I don't know. I want to do what's right for Martin's Editions. I've been here for almost 50 years in Martin's Editions, and I want to do what's right for Martin's Editions.
We all do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all do, Paul. I mean, I think like we're at this point we're following the procedure, and yeah, it's from my purview. It's in the council's hands now, and we've gotten resident feedback, and like to George's point, you know, this feedback will be looked at, and then it's up to the council what they'd like to incorporate. Is that correct, Andrew?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so like George said, we'll have a robust, what we did is not the final version. So I don't want you to lose hope or feel that we're not doing justice. We did the best we could with the knowledge that we had. I'm a newbie at this. This is the first time I'm participating. And so we all have Farms Edition's best interest.
But the committee never voted on many of those edits.
Like what?
On the edits that were made into the January 6th. I mean,
What edits specifically?
Well, that paper basically were the changes. I mean, that's.
I know. I'm just curious. What concerns you?
What concerns me is the changes that were made after the December 16th draft.
So, Paul, I can reiterate this again. The changes that were made were either changes that were voted on by the committee at the November and December meetings, or there were the 4 subjects that then we voted on at the January meeting. So those changes were all part of committee agreements at one meeting or another. They might not have been things we had voted on in November, might not have been fully incorporated into whatever the drafts that were shared in December were, but none of those were new things that were had kind of been created whole cloth in the run up to that January meeting. The only things that were new at the January meeting that hadn't been voted on were those 4 subjects that we voted on at that meeting. So the grace period, the Dropbox out early, the fix to the ballot counting date versus the receipt date, et cetera, that were all the stuff that we had flagged in the email. All the other stuff was stuff that had been previously discussed and addressed at the committee level.
Could I ask for help from Marty? Hi. Marty, you're still on? Marty had a major role in that 22-person paper, and she was the one that put all those pieces together, or helped to put all those pieces together. But in the feeling that I got from it was that people were coming in and saying, wait a minute, this isn't what we saw in the what the committee of 5 voted on. These are changes that were, that were coming in later. Well, anyhow,
I understand. Sorry.
Yeah, just
I'm sorry.
procedurally, Paul had motioned that we send an updated plan to the council incorporating resident comments. I didn't hear a second.
I did not second.
I also don't second, so I don't know what the
So
terminology is for that,
yeah.
but
Technically, what you'd say in the minutes is that the motion failed due to the lack of a second.
thank you. Okay. So, addressing, because I don't want to lose the thread on this, communications calendar elements. Do we have a decision and consensus around what we want to do if we have insufficient nominees for total number of spots? Do we have any potential proposed edits, changes to the draft calendar as it exists now? And then there's one sub-conversation I think we need to have about the messaging about the nominations materials. But I'll leave back to that in a sec.
I'm fine with like increasing marketing. I'm trying to think of like other ways to recruit.
Yeah.
Like write-in.
So there is a write-in process, and so that's one that can trigger if, I mean, write-ins are acceptable even if we have more than enough things. There's always a spot for those on the ballot, and so, I mean, that's functionally what will happen if we do increased messaging and we still only have 2 candidates for 3 spots. Is it's going to come down to the write-in votes.
I found out about this from the Barnes Edition newsletter, so
Yeah.
assuming people check their email, I think like that's probably if we keep pushing that messaging. Stand on the corner by Brookville Market and hand out free cookies as people.
Yeah, Paul, what are your thoughts?
I don't know. I'd rather not comment on that.
Okay, so I think I will motion that we incorporate into the communications plan that we will do if we are a week out from the nomination deadline and we have fewer candidates than, if we have fewer than 3 candidates, which is how many spots are open this year, that we insert some increased messaging into the, either through email and through whatever other methods we think are going to produce a result, but we have some increased messaging during the last week in the run-up to the nomination period ending to try to encourage additional candidates if we are a week out and we have 2 or fewer candidates.
Does that prohibit any of the committee members calling and encouraging people to to be nominees? I'm not sure I feel one way or the other on that. I'm just asking a question.
I would not anticipate, this motion would not preclude that. I am not an expert in whether or not there would be anything from the ethics guidelines related to that, but assuming it's permissible under the existing code and ethics guidelines and everything else, yeah, this would not in any way prohibit that. This would just be, we're going to do some increased messaging to try to encourage people to either nominate themselves or to find someone who is willing to accept their nomination.
I have a question.
Yeah.
George, Leah, Paul, thanks. I can hold it till the resident comments. It pertains to the messaging. So, it's like a question, suggestion. If, do you want me to hold it or?
No.
Okay. Well, just wondering your candidate materials, your strategy, and kind of, I'm just wondering about kind of the tone you're going to take with the messaging because, as many people might have known, I ran 3 times as a candidate. The 3rd time was a charm. But I recall past elections and kind of the tone, kind of friendly and airy for the call for candidates. And I believe in one of them, it might have said something like, expect maybe an average of 4 hours a week. And I would suggest staying away from any hourly.
I agree with you.
Because I know for a fact I put in more than 4 hours a week, and I know that our chair has. So, again, being a council member, we take it seriously, and as Andrew says, we signed up for this, and he's right, and we're we take it seriously. So, that's not to discourage anybody. I just want people to know that, it's hard to put a number on it. That's not an accurate average. So maybe stay away from language like that. That was my only suggestion.
We will consult with you before we proceed with any messaging, Katie.
Not complaining. Enjoy serving, but I just wouldn't say a number like, it's 4 hours a week.
Agreed.
But that given it's different for every council member. So I just feel like candidates potential candidates should know that, but they are welcome, and I am encouraging them, and the more the merrier. So I just want to get that out there.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
Okay. So I motioned for increased messaging during the week leading up to the deadline. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a second. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. So the next one goes to what is, do we have anything else for communications elements that people wanted to talk about? Because the next one builds on what kind of Katie was saying. It goes to the opening of the nomination period actions. That's the next item on the agenda. So before I close out communications, I wanted to see, anyone have anything else? Okay. Okay, so opening the nomination period action, Leah, I think we've already said we're gonna do, you're working on the first draft of the announcement language. We need to get the material ready for the website. We need to, the other one that I have on my plate as an action item is pulling the relevant documents, materials for the website. So we'll make sure that we put the the conflict of interest form that candidates have to fill out is also on the website, so that way it's in one easy place for people to find. Paul and Leah, I ask, just for you guys, just to double check and make sure you have access to the committee inbox, because I think we're gonna wanna, all three of us keeping an eye on the inbox as nominations come in, just making sure that we're not missing anything, or more specifically, any questions that come in, making sure we flag them so that we as a committee can put together a unified response to any questions that come in, where if someone has a question about, I want to nominate but I don't, et cetera, making sure we're spotting those quickly so we can be responsive on those. So I would just ask both of you make sure that you have access to the inbox. If you don't have the current password, you can call me or you can call Niles and we can make sure you have the password. The other thing that I think we wanted to flag was something we discussed at the November 4th or the November 8th meeting. Sorry, I'm working on the minutes for those and they're kind of blurring in my head slightly. But for candidate statements, when they come in, that would be by the 25th. For candidate statements, it's a generally good principle that we're not going to edit candidate statements. The one thing that we might want to consider, based off of past practice and from discussion with Niles, is that we might want to set out, these are some standards for candidate statements. They can be, I don't think we want to do anything content related other than just general good guidance that we're not publishing profanity, and any, thing like that, but I think that would generally be covered by things, but more, if we want to put in word counts, I think we'll want to put in some caveats that Niles can probably help us with around formatting, just to make sure that it's something that's going to translate to Constant Contact, that's going to translate to the website, because we want to make sure that those translate easily, because otherwise it can start presenting some issues for people who have to use screen readers, things like that. You want to make sure that it's all something that is easy to transport over, where it's not going to require, or where it's not going to present a challenge for someone who is using a screen reader. So I think last year, I forget what we had said, but I think last year was around the candidate statement should be around, or we said, I think we put a cap of 500 words on it, but I think 500 is generally around a full page, single space. I don't know if you think longer, shorter, any other changes. I think the only other one that Niles and I had briefly discussed for Constant Contact is we can't guarantee formatting will always translate, because I don't think Constant Contact can do secondary bullets. They can do a bulleted list. If you wanted to have a bulleted list, that's perfectly fine, but Constant Contact won't work if you try and do bullet, sub-bullet,
Yeah.
sub-bullet, sub-bullet.
It has some limitations on that, and so the other thing is the types of bullets it can do. It can only do like circle bullets or numbers. It can't do triangles or any of that other stuff. So
So for the candidate statements, are they all collected and released at the same time?
yeah, yeah. So once you've confirmed, once the committee has confirmed that everybody's statements are in, that they've signed the conflict of interest form, you announce the candidates, and then part of that announcement is releasing all of the statements. So it's all done as one shebang, basically.
500 words seems like a lot.
I mean, I think it was 500 last year.
I don't know what best practices.
I'd have to double check my notes, but I think for the most part, the candidates, nobody was like right up against it, but everybody was generally pretty close. And that's the top end. I think some people have gone shorter in the past, but it gives them a full page, single space to kind of lay out. I think in the past we've getting the candidate statement email also just basically said the candidate statement is your opportunity to kind of introduce yourself and say why you're running for council. We can either include that or not include, kind of some guidance on what we would encourage people to put in there, but I don't think we want to get too detailed on that. But I mean, we've got two people who submitted candidate statements last year. Tell us if 500 was way too many or too restrictive.
One second. Yeah. I don't know if Katie or Andrew had a thought there, but
I didn't feel like it was
okay.
limiting or too much. I mean, I think folks want to tell their story and what their goals are and what their vision is for as a potential council member. So I think a one-page single space is not a challenge for someone who's interested in running for council.
Yeah. Ooh, hang on. There we go.
Hi, Senior. I agree. I think that's just the right amount, and it's kind of an even playing field. Keeps it concise and equal for everyone. So, I know in past years people have brought up the addition of like a photo to, some people kind of put a face to a name. But I don't know if that if you're mulling that over, but I think that word amount is just right.
And by the way, I mean, I'm reading Marty's comments. I don't know why we have to limit it to 500. If people want to do 800 or 700, let them do it. If they have more to say, more power to them. But I mean, somewhere you want to do a cutoff just to keep the playing field level, as Marty puts it. If you can't express your views in 500 words, and you feel like you need a couple hundred more, no skin off your nose, teeth, whatever the expression is. You guys, this is the easiest part of the. Right.
I would say the same thing. I mean, that's a starting point. If you want to say 500 to 800, I don't know if you want to give a range, but at least 500 words, and then I don't know.
I would say not at least, because they might. I would say no more than.
No more than.
Because there might be people saying, "My name is Andrew. I'm your man." That's all you want to say. I mean, so.
With the picture.
With the picture.
Short and sweet. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, we don't have to be married to the number 500. If you wanted to go up, so people who can really talk about themselves, I would say more than 500.
Okay.
I'm ambivalent. If 800 is the magic number, if someone wants to do that, that's fine.
800 works for me. Paul, does that sound good for you?
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm told it was 800 last year, somebody said.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I think 800 works. And I think, we'll put in just some general formatting requirements. I think last year we said it's got to be a doc file, not sending it as a PDF. It's got to be something that is a doc file, and that's a technical one for it being able to be copied and put up on the website and things like that. But I think all that's pretty easy, straightforward stuff.
And I think for simplicity purposes, like, are we supposed to specify like font or black or any of that stuff?
No, that's where the doc file helps, because the website and Constant Contact all have a standard font, and so it's going to go into the standard formatting for that, and so that's where we kind of add the caveat. We're not editing statements, but it's going to be put into the font and sizing format for the website and the village newsletter and the emails that uses the village stuff. So that's where having it as a Word doc matters, where we can't guarantee that it's going to be in whatever font you sent it to us, but it's going to be in the standard font. And that's where I think word count also saves us from, we discussed that last year, where word count gets us out of not saying like one page, because then all of a sudden you get a thing that's in 8-point font and someone has written a treatise, or the difference in line spacing, etc. We just say 800 words, and then it's going to go into the standard stuff.
Yeah, and just as a sort of a general thing, what we put most of the newsletter and the wrap up is like Georgia is the font, because what we found is that is what most people's email clients can read. There's a weird thing where we had residents, if it was different, the email wouldn't open properly for them. So we've tried to make everything that same Georgia font, simply because that seems to be the one that most people can do. So,
and I think that also Georgia font and the sizing stuff also again helps with 508 compliance. I forget what it's called for this at the state level, but having that we have a standard thing where it's going to make sure that it's something that's going to be for people who have visual impairments. It's going to be readable.
I think Larry wants to comment on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, just
Sort of this. A minute ago, many minutes ago, you made a comment about editing the candidate statements, and I think perhaps that should be what you said should be maybe rethought. I think the committee should take responsibility to edit, to ensure people don't make false accusations, inaccurate promises. If I'm elected, I can do this, when in fact no one would have the power to do what they're claiming, or to state things in that way. I mean, I think that you really do need to look at the relevance of what the candidate statements are, and I don't see how you can just say, well, we want to make sure there's no profanity. There could be some really, that can open the door for people doing things in that forum and in that presentation that are just not what should be done.
I'm concerned about censorship, Larry.
I know that all of us are, but again, suppose somebody uses it as a form to slander some. You know how people running for office tend to use negative. What do you call that when they run? Negative comments as a basis for getting elected. Well, what if that turns into something that's really not good? Are you going to say we're helpless to do this because we said that we wouldn't do it? You have a responsibility to make sure that things that are not injurious or false statements flat out. I'm going to remove this charter and redo it so that things are different when the person can't do it. You've got some responsibilities there. Just saying they're difficult, and you don't want to, be censoring people unnecessarily is true. But it seems like every other governing body has a control on this. So I'm sure that you guys can be able to deal with this as well. You can always check the state and the county elections committees for guidance.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, so I think, we seem to have general kind of consensus relating to the language for the email, kind of laying out the stuff around the candidate statements. We'll make sure the election form is available on the website. We already put in the provision that we'll spot or we'll look at candidate statement and conflict of interest forms and see if there's any errors there, and notify the nominees so that they have their 24 hours to correct any errors. I think we've generally got kind of agreement on that. The other nominations period, opening of the nomination period actions, I think a lot of it we covered earlier with discussion that Paul had brought up around the packet and making sure we've got the language ready on dates and why they're important, that we will, and making sure we've got some of that stuff ready for the website, and then we'll eventually be able to populate it in with the candidate statements. So, Leah, Paul, are there any other actions you can think of for the opening of the nomination period that we would need to do, keeping in mind that, yeah, it's probably, I mean, unless the council makes a change to the plan as introduced in the timeline, the nomination period is going to open on Friday the 18th, and we're going to want to make sure we have this stuff ready to go in case the council does sign off on that being the date on the 17th. We want to try and have as much of this done in advance as possible.
I can't think of anything myself.
Same.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I think we'll get the materials ready. We'll, I'm sure, be kind of sharing some stuff to make sure we're all, you know, kind of giving the thumbs up, giving the sign off on that. Okay. Before we move to resident comment, I just would add once again about past minutes. Thank both of you guys for kind of your thumbs up and approval on the minutes for the November 15th, mid-December, and the January meetings. I sent the draft minutes of the November 4th meeting around, and I'm like halfway done with the minutes for the November 8th meeting. And I'll have those around to you guys soon if you can, once those are circulated, if you can take a look at those and either, as I've said in emails, if they look okay, I think we can do administrative approval and we can get them up on the website. If you spot an issue, just raise the red flag, hey, we have an issue, and we'll discuss it at our next committee meeting. So I asked you to take a look at that. And then the other one, I know Niles had sent around the message last week about the NPIA request we got. So just when we have a obligation to respond to those in a timely manner. So if you can take a look, make sure that the emails have been that would be subject to the NPIA request are forwarded over to the committee inbox, so that way we can make sure that that is captured in that. And just yet again a reminder about good practice of any emails related to the business of the election committee, making sure we're CCing the committee inbox, just so that way it's a good single repository and we don't have to spend a lot of time digging through personal email accounts trying to find all of this stuff to make sure that we are in compliance. Did either of you have any questions on that? Okay. And then the last one, Andrew had mentioned this earlier. I know the council sent out a request for volunteers for the election committee for those spots that went out Friday, I think, and I think that Niles and Andrew said we're going to see another one, just another encouragement or flagging it for everyone that is out right now. If you are interested in volunteering, follow the messaging that is included in there to notify the council that you are interested in volunteering to be on the committee, because I know the committee is, or the council is planning to discuss that soon. So just yet another reminder about that for everyone.
I think Susan Kahn wanted to make a statement.
Yeah, before we go into resident comments, sorry, I'm just capturing a couple of notes real quick. I will get the minutes from tonight sent around soon for everyone. Before we move into Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm capturing my notes. Okay, before we go into resident comments, Paul, Leah, anything else? Any other committee business you wanted to discuss? I think we'll schedule another committee meeting for once the nomination period is open. So and we have the final election plan from the council approved. So end of the month into sometime in early March, most likely.
Okay.
Are there any other?
I don't have anything else. No.
Leah, anything? Okay.
No, I don't.
Okay. So. Now moving into a resident comment period. Niles, I think you've been keeping on. I think so.
So I know Larry wanted to say something right before the end of the previous one, or right after the close of the previous one. So I said we would start there. So I'm going to ask him to unmute first.
Okay, so I may have missed something on today, but pardon me if I'm doing a poor analysis here. But this started out, I think, as a five-member election committee. Two of the members resigned in outrage, which has not been properly. The fact that it should be repeatedly said to acknowledge what it is, and how unacceptable that is. And a third member rescinded their vote on a subsequent vote. Brings it down to two people who are presenting a package that 22 other people who are volunteers and hard workers in this village object to. And I've listened tonight to all the people and everyone pushing the responsibility elsewhere, and no one stating what's going to be done to rectify that. George, if you don't want to make a statement about it, that's fine, but perhaps you'll give the time over to Andrew to give us some very clear insight about how this is going to get rectified. 22 people really object to what's going on, and only 2 people are okay with it.
Erie, have you been on since the beginning?
I've been on it for almost the first 15 minutes I was not on.
Because we've already talked about the process like 2 or 3 times, but Andrew,
well,
if you want to mention it for the 4th time,
well, actually, that's not exactly true. You have sort of discussed around it. I haven't heard a specific statement as to what's going to be done. The last thing I heard is George and Andrew puzzling over what might be done.
Larry, so you definitely missed it. I mentioned to you that the council had discussed that we agreed that we should bring this committee back to a 5-person committee, and that we have requested volunteers to come forward, and there's a process so it's not disparate. There's a process that Niles has put out, a call for volunteers, and there's a deadline, I think next week, Monday, close of business, something like that, for the committee, the council then to hopefully have at least 2 volunteers that they can approve and appoint.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the disparity between what was brought to you by Peter Kahn in December and what was presented to you by George in January. And the fact that
there are 2 things you were talking about.
I'm sorry
about the committee.
I'm sorry if I said this poorly, but what I'm centering on right now is what is going to be the approved plan for the committee's operation. Not, and I agree, I understand that and I've heard you about the increasing this, bringing it back to 5 members. Okay, what about the other part?
Well, insofar as the 22 folks that signed their comments is being reviewed. And by the way, when you say two, I think it's not fair, again, to say, Sis George and Leah, this plan was approved by all three of them. And I understand that Paul is having issues with it. At the same time, I also want to be clear that the 22 signatories do not make a majority of this village and the comments that have been provided. Okay, so when you talk about minority versus majority, just because 22 folks have signed on to something doesn't make them a majority of all the residents in this village.
No one.
I want to confirm.
But that's so unfair.
Hey, Paul,
I'm not. Excuse me.
Sorry, can you let Andrew finish talking and then we'll come back to you?
Larry, let me just finish. Every resident's comments and views will be taken into consideration. Every single one. And the ones that were expressed by those that signed, the 22 or so that signed the letter and the comments that were submitted are reflected in others as well. So of course they're going to get great consideration because those that have responded to this comment period, many of whom have similar opinions, all of that will be considered. So that's the process. The process is that the council is looking at all the comments, and you will see that reflected in the final outcome, I am certain, of that election plan.
Can I say, all right?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, but I would, what an interesting way of saying things. Wouldn't it be more helpful to say more specifically what consider means? Wouldn't it be more helpful to say that, that in some way that some changes would be voted on by the council, accepted, and like that, rather than this vague consideration? You know, everybody's considered the bejesus out of a lot of things, and it does nothing. Wait, you made me wait, okay?
Yeah.
So the next part is for you to suggest that I was saying that 22 people are a majority is, you know, that's going sideways. It's not necessary to make that kind of silly statement. Okay, you know I never made that representation. The weight of it is there's two people that are in one position, there's 22 others that aren't. Both of those facts are relevant. The fact that you want to twist that into something more dramatic is not, it's beneath you. You shouldn't do it.
Not twisting anything, Larry.
Okay.
Yes, you did. It's not a majority.
Andrew, this sounds like this is more of a conversation around the council's process for this, rather than something specifically relating to the election committee. So I would ask whether or not there is a more appropriate venue for that conversation.
I'd like to know if the council is going to accept motions on the plan that's been presented and vote on those motions.
Larry, I think that would probably be a
Let
question
me
for the
just
council
say
meeting.
this quickly, George, real quickly. I know semantics and the way things are phrased, you know, it matters, and I agree. I don't speak on behalf of the council, but I can tell you that yes, of course, there will be votes on this election plan and motions made. So when I say consideration, it's semantics. I apologize, I didn't use the word that resonated better in this regard, but that's exactly what's going to happen. But I cannot tell you which ones because I don't speak on behalf of every council member.
So how do we find out? Do we find out that night? Is there some way to communicate about this earlier so the people who want to have certain things considered can do it in a way that it saves everybody time and problems?
But that's exactly what's going on right now, right? Isn't that what is happening?
No, I don't know what's going to happen.
Their voice, pardon?
I don't know what's going to happen. I thought, frankly, it would have been, you know, it's always somebody else can do the work. I agree. But the point is that It'd be very informative to see a comparison between what Peter submitted and what was submitted in January. And to address specifically the items that should be brought to the forefront and voted on specifically to satisfy the people who care enough to spend the time working on this. And I'm not talking about just 2 people that are elected or appointed, but I'm talking about the 22 other people who spent a lot of time on this. So I still don't know what's going to happen between now and the 17th and how that might be beneficial. Perhaps there could be you could send us an email about it, Andrew, or something about if we want things to be considered by the council, should we submit them in a specific way? I mean, what?
So, Larry? Sorry, do you mind if I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
No, I don't mind at all. All I'm saying is I just don't want it to go that this meeting's closed. We go to 9 days of nothing, and then the council goes in and does things that are not expected or beneficial. That's all.
So Larry, I think, like I said, that sounds like it's something that is, something that it sounds like the council will need to address. I can speak for the election committee, which is we're going to stick with what we've agreed on, which is if you have specific comments, concerns, anything you would like to raise to the council, if you email the council inbox, vmaelections@martinseditions.org, we will ensure that that is passed up to the council. It is something that they will have visibility into. If you have specific things about the plan, if you have general comments about the plan or the process, I can speak for the election committee because this is something we've already agreed to. Send them in. We will make sure that those go up to the council. Council emails activities, I think, is something that this is not the right forum to address because we don't actually have the council here to provide comment on this, nor would it be appropriate for council members to get into that because of lack of public messaging. So I think, thank you, Larry, for those comments.
Yep.
Niles, who is up next?
Yep. So we're going to go Marty, then Lynn, then Jeffrey there, just so that you know the order of how this is going to go, so you don't have to hold your hand the entire time. I
would like to defer to Jeffrey Goldberg and then come back afterwards, and maybe after Lynn too.
Certainly.
So go ahead, guys.
Let me just ask Jeffrey to unmute there.
Yes. When I was courting girls in the Bronx, New York, as a young man, I the Harley Davidson Club, but it was restricted. It was called the Star of Davidson. Only to Jewish women and Jewish male drivers. When I went out with my dates, I never sent them tracks to be corrected. You two guys, George and Andrew, I believe you sent them track changes. I never did that when I asked the date out. What is a track change? Is that an agreement to go out with my Harley Davidson? Or what is it?
You're
Is that a
asking the
question,
technical
Jeffrey?
question, what is track changes?
Hang on. Oh, hang on 1 second. All right.
Are you asking, like, technically, what is a track change? Jeffrey?
Yeah. I think you might have froze there.
Yeah. It looks
Yeah,
like he's
let's-
frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. If and when Jeffrey's video comes back, I think we can loop back to that question. But moving on to Lynn,
Yeah.
I think in the meantime, and
Yeah.
then when Jeffrey's video comes back, we will circle back to him. So Lynn,
Yeah.
Yeah. You got me?
Yep. You're there. You're on.
All right, 4 items. Is there anything that would prevent an election committee with a total membership exceeding 5?
I think that would be related personally to the charter.
So the short answer is no. It doesn't have to be 5. The code only sets a minimum, not a maximum. But it would be up to the council to determine how many seats they would that would either be added, to use a technical term, or be a part of it. But that's a council question on that front.
In light of the recent history, it would seem to me that the more members on the election committee for the completion of this business, the more representative the entire community would be better represented. And I would implore that the council accept anyone who puts their name forward to be on the committee. And if the total number of names submitted exceeds 5, that's fine. I think all Martin's Edition would be better represented. Number 1, that's number 2. No, that was number 1. Number 2, you've been referring to a cover letter with regard to the nominations, the candidates' statements. It would seem that there's been cover letters in previous years. You wouldn't necessarily have to be generating an entirely new one. You could make reference to previous years and not just the one from 2021. And then the thing that really has me concerned is the ballot box access, and who would have access to that box, under what circumstances, and would there be a witness? I think that it should be a 2-person plus witness, just to leave absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind as to what happened to whenever that ballot box was being happened. And there's been nothing specific mentioned as to the security of the ballot box once the ballots start to be put into that box. And I think we need some very specific guidelines on that. Otherwise, there's too much left in the air. We don't need anything left in the air. And then with regard to the items that were submitted by the 22 signatories, I'm not sure what how this is going to be handled on the February 17th agenda, but I would like to see that each one of those items is discussed one by one and then voted on in the council meeting, to determine if they're going to be included in the election plan or not. Once one has been discussed by the council members, then they could move on to the next one after it has been voted on. Otherwise, we in the community are not going to know just exactly how these decisions have been made. I would implore that practice to take place on the February 17th meeting. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Len. Obviously, for the...
hang on 1 second. Sorry. We wanted to go back to Marty, or did you want to answer? Sorry, I wasn't sure what was going on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say really quickly,
Oh, yeah.
For the ballot box access and the cover letter, Lynn, fully on board with you on those ones. I think the cover letter, to whatever extent we're able to mine the existing language, that it's going to be a big set of resources that we're going to tap into. No sense in reinventing the wheel. And same thing with the ballot box access. I think there's some procedures that were documented by committees in prior years about how to handle having the ballot box available in advance of election day, and the management around that, around making sure there's witnesses and the proper restrictions on who is handling the ballot box at any given moment. I think all of that is stuff that I think we're going to be in. None of that is going to be new things, but that is all stuff that I know the committee is going to be pulling together in the coming weeks and months.
All right. Then I'm going to ask Marty to unmute, and then we'll go from there. Hang on. Because I think Larry wanted to speak again. But go ahead, Marty.
Okay, again, I appreciate the hour and the patience here, and I think it speaks to the importance that we all place on having good election procedures, and I thank you all for it. A couple of points. We do already have nomination announcements and all these templates from prior years, I would take a point that Katie made in an earlier meeting, which is the friendly tone of the announcements that was used from 2016 through 2020. Really was, I think, helpful in terms of bridging gaps and healing divisions. And I would encourage this committee to go back and look not at last year's announcements, but at the much friendlier, more voter-friendly kind of tone that we had in prior years. Again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel there. On a more substantive issue, one of the 7 major issues raised in the community letter listed a whole list of best practices. And as of right now, I understand that we don't yet have, Niles tell me if this is wrong, or George tell me, we don't yet have a selection of who our contractor will be for this year.
That's correct. The I'm going to try an RFP again. It doesn't require an RFP because the amount is less than what's required, but I'm going to send out an RFP again on the for the vendors just to solicit responses. But that will be very shortly. That'll be this week, and then we'll see what the response
is. That's good, because that needs to happen. Because
yes.
Part of what the election committee needs to do is give instructions
to
that vendor.
Yes.
And again, I would recommend Eclectic. I thought we've trained them well now for the last 2 years.
Certainly.
Niles, I thank you for your help with
that.
Eclectic now knows that we have very particular election requirements here. And that goes to recommendation number 6 in the community letter, which listed just a whole, sort of handy checklist of standard procedures, best practices, if you want to call them that. Certifying the voter roll, et cetera. But some of them really do involve specific instructions to the vendor, like rotating the names on the ballot.
Yes.
And making sure that we have postal tracking codes on both the incoming and outcoming ballot packets. And making sure that the committee as a whole reviews what that contractor sends out in detail and proofreads it carefully. And it's listed. So my question is for both the council and the committee, are you willing to commit tonight to following those standard practices that are listed in recommendation 6? Those are mechanics, they're election mechanics. But of course, when it comes to elections, mechanics can affect the outcome. And we all know that. So these are standard procedures. I don't think there's anything that is, questionable there. It's things we normally would have done in any case. We did most of these things before we even had any election rules in writing, before we even had an ordinance. So is the committee willing to make a commitment tonight to follow those practices? And if not, will council make a commitment to follow those practices? Or both? So that's a question for both Andrew and George. And I have one more thing after that.
Let's do your one more thing, Marty, and then we'll circle back.
Well, it comes back to how you answered this one, so please answer this one first.
I'm not going to speak for the rest of the committee, nor am I going to comment on things. I'm just going to say, I can say for me, I've worked on a lot of elections for a while in a lot of different roles, and I can assure everyone that I am going to be pushing for and continuously implementing best practices.
Including
I'm not going to comment specifically about what is included in something in the resident comments, because among other things I don't have it in front of me. But I'm going to say that as someone who has worked on a lot of elections and cares deeply about the democratic process, that I can tell you that I'm in favor of following best practices on these things, but I'm not going to comment specifically on something that I don't currently have in front of me.
All right,
and I can't speak for the other committee members. That's just me personally.
Would the other committee members like to comment?
I'd say the same. I don't have it in front of me. I can't comment.
I support best
But
practice.
I also I support best practices, Marty.
Okay, well, you've got a handy list there, so thank you. I hope you will follow up on all of them. And Andrew, would you like to say anything about that?
Hey, Marty, I don't think you're expecting anyone to say we're not in favor of best practices, okay? I don't have it in front of me. Of course we are in favor of best practices, okay? Next question.
Okay, next question. In terms of the voter roll issues, one of the changes that was not voted on in the January 6th plan was the removal of the committee's responsibility for the voter roll. And of course, many commenters, I'm sure, besides the 22 people who signed the community note, have said that this is really an important structural issue to maintain the independence of the election, that you don't have the employees, perhaps, of incumbent candidates managing your election. And I simply want to stress here that part of what goes on in terms of those mechanics in recommendation 6 is about the independence of the election and the independent management of the election. Once the council votes on an approved election plan, and I do trust that you'll come up with a good plan this year. I think that you have a lot of input here and a lot of community concern that has been helpful, and I hope will continue to be helpful. And I hope you will have specific itemized votes on all of these recommendations at the council meeting. I also think that it's important to keep in mind the goal of this whole process. And it goes back to not just ensuring that the election is fair in terms of its regulatory mechanics, but that the purpose is to make sure that all qualified voters can, I'm reading from the preamble, can freely exercise their right to vote. And so that comes back to one of the issues that has been contentious here, which is disqualifying voters who fail to sign their ballot envelopes, when in fact it's very easy, and Montgomery County itself does allow voters to correct that kind of mistake. Arthur was very concerned and insisted that VMA not do that. I want to reiterate that in terms of our overall what's best for VMA is to have every vote counted. And it's very easy to correct a missing signature on an envelope affidavit. That is not a big deal to do at all. Like I said, the county does it, 20 states do it. You know this. And so I'd encourage the council to really think hard about the fact that so many people really do believe that every vote should count, and I think you all believe that. And to disqualify people from voting because of something that is easily remedied, really, it sticks out like a sore thumb here in this plan. The residents' comments did not specifically say, change that back, cure all ballot envelopes that can be cured, including missing signatures. The committee as a whole deferred to Arthur's insistence that unsigned envelopes not be eligible for curing. But there's a very strong argument to be made that because it's so easy to fix that problem, that we owe it as a courtesy, just to be decent to help our neighbors vote, to not disqualify people for that. And many elections, of course, are decided by just a handful of votes. And I could see really difficult problems in the head. I mean, I believe in avoiding problems if you can see them coming. And if we had an election where 4 voters were disqualified because they didn't sign it, when that could have been fixed easily, and the difference in the election results was a difference of 3 ballots, you've got an election that could be thrown into challenge. And because legally it is very easy to correct an unsigned ballot. So again, think hard about the repercussions of this stuff. I don't want to see our elections get messy. We had a very streamlined, simple, friendly process of running elections. That got derailed. And the 21 plan is not voter friendly. The 22 plan that Peter, provided and presented, or tried to present on December 16th, was back to being voter friendly. And I would encourage the council to really keep your eyes on the prize. This is a friendly village with 600 voters. It should be friendly. There's no reason to disqualify people over things that can be easily fixed. So I would really ask, even though the residents' comments didn't go that far, I would ask the council to think long and hard. Because before 2021, as far as I know, we never disqualified anybody over an envelope. Never. As far as back as I can remember, and I've talked to people who did this before me, there's no need to disqualify any vote. And what's best for VMA is that all votes be counted, particularly because our elections are so close. So again, it goes to the election mechanics. There's nothing here that is purely administrative because it all has consequences. The biggest consequence being obviously the sacred right to vote, the fundamental right to vote for every qualified voter. And I would like to leave it on that positive note that do what you can to make this election voter friendly and as transparent as possible. And thank you for the time you're putting into it. It shouldn't be this contentious. It wasn't in prior years. It was pretty streamlined, friendly process, and very, very transparent. And that's where we need to get back to, and I think we're on the path here. Thank you, everyone, for the time and the effort you're putting into this, and for the thought that people are contributing. This really does matter to this village. Thank you very much, and good night. It's Friday.
Thank you, Marty.
So I know Larry has his hand up, but Larry, if you would be okay, I see Susan also has her hand up, and I want to try and get to everyone, everyone at least once before we move back to people, if that's okay.
Oh, yep. I'm asking you to unmute now. So.
Hi, thank you again. I really want to echo or affirm what I just heard Marty saying. I agree that every vote really should be counted. And I kind of wanted you to check with Ron, because if I understood correctly, you were saying that Ron said you cannot create a blanket rule about what you can cure. But if I understand correctly, it's written in the current plan that you cannot cure unsigned ballots. So if that's written in, can you just check to make sure from Ron? Because when you say what you cannot cure, you are kind of by default saying that you can cure everything else. So I do, to me, the way it was written originally, where there was more open-endedness, you could do either on these. That would allow you, in the case where it's a really close election, let's say you've got 3 to 10 unsigned ballots, and that could make a difference. And then you don't have to do a whole other election. You can actually cure those few and see what the outcome is. It might be just as well to retain the ability to cure an unsigned ballot envelope if you want to, because that is the wording that was originally there, and that's just an idea. And to check with him to make sure that it is indeed true that you can legislate against unsigned ballots. You can say that you can discriminate against them and say we will not count them, but you can't say what you can do. So anyway, I just want to check. Okay. And the other thing was that the point that was being made that I think was rephrasing what Jeffrey was saying, that you can see that the track changes, saying that you have a track changes document attached to something does not necessarily mean that there's a committee agreement about every part of that unless it's been explicitly discussed. For example, no committee vote to remove the committee's responsibility for the voter roll is really substantive. There's no committee vote to remove the obligation to mail out the election info. That's substantive. And just on that note, I would say, please add that back to an and instead of an or, because people, it's not only that some people are not technologically savvy, they're not reading everything online, but we know we've already had an issue with some people not following instructions that you want them to follow about the ballot envelope signing them. And when you're sending these things out, it's not just the candidate statements, it's also instructions about voting. So if you get those in multiple forms, so paper form at your home, in your mail, as well as in digital form, then I just think you have a greater chance of really getting people to read that. And there is a need, and even a charter obligation, I guess, to do civic education. So I think that it really would be good to change that or back to an and, so that you do necessarily mail that to people, especially seniors, especially people who are ability challenged, who might have issues with seeing things or anyway. So the other last thing was the ballot security, having a ballot box at the office just seems really troublesome to me in terms of anything happens, it's all going to be on Niles, what happens inside of there, leaving that kind of unmonitored. I think the original idea was have a sidewalk event. For that one sidewalk event, have the ballot box there. People can drop your ballots in. Right afterwards, the election officials, the election committee people will make sure all of those ballots are sent back to the vendor, because this is a fundamentally different thing than's been done before. We have not had, before you had people turning in their ballots to the VMA because things were counted here by hand. We now have a fundamentally different process of things being counted by a vendor off-site. So it's really not a precedent for leaving a ballot, something there when you had before maybe 2, at most 8 absentee ballots, that's all you're dealing with being deposited, or that were extra before, and now you're having hundreds. I just think it's, that ultimately needs to go to a different destination. It's just kind of unusual to have that amount of insecurity and different people handling your ballots. And then finally, pushing back the messaging. You talked about increased messaging or changing a deadline, for instance. Again, the committee, if they wanted to, could have different mechanisms that they would use. And finally, best practices. If somebody asks you about running, or your election committee people want to encourage someone to run, but specifically if you're asked, I think a best practice is something we could go to what I've heard an election chair do in the past, which is use literally the words, I encourage you to run as I encourage everyone to run for office. I think it's a great thing to do. So in other words, then you're not recruiting an individual specifically. You're saying, I encourage you as I encourage everyone. That is that's a best practice comment, I think, from a previous election committee chair, and that's the type of comment I think that you could make without feeling like you're encouraging one person in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Andrew? Or sorry, Larry, I think we said we were going to come back to Larry.
Yeah, I've got good news for Niles. I was thinking back before we were incorporated. And, Paul said he's been here almost 50 years as a villager. And I remember back, there were practices we did back then that go all the way back to the times of Caesar, where what we would do now is we have a box, I'll look around and find it, of symbols, runes, and spells that we will can come and put on that ballot box, and I guarantee you it'll work. Nobody will touch it with it. So that's my suggestion.
Thanks, Larry. Andrew, before we come to you, I think go to 99% sure iPad is Tiffany. Is that okay with you? Okay.
Yeah, I think I want to say I appreciate the work of the committee members. As a former council member and committee member, I know you guys are thankless at times, so just stick with it. I followed this legislative process from the committee work in the fall as well as the council meetings. And to my knowledge, the January meeting of the committee was the first time legislative language, 4 corners of a document was actually presented to the public and discussed in an open meeting. And that language was then sent to the council for them to do their work. There have been a lot of claims this evening about what's happened in the past, and I would encourage folks, council members, residents who are interested, go to the website. You can read that between 2017 and 2019, there were about a dozen ballots that were disqualified. You can read that in 2020, the year of the first all mail-in election in Martin's Additions, the quote, village staff will prepare and maintain a list of qualified voters and will provide that list to the election service provider to assist in the conduct of the election. You can see that there were vote counting procedures that were adopted last year that include the legal counsel. And for the first time, residents were able to observe, not just candidate observers, but all residents who were interested were able to observe vote counting last year. So I think there's a lot of information floating around. Not all of it is accurate, but there is a lot of information on our website, and I would encourage folks to go there and check it out. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Andrew?
A couple of quick reactions and just food for thought. And what Tiffany just said reminded me of previous comments from Marty, and I think Susan's talked about curing. We talk about the envelopes and not signed and smudged and all that. What I do recall I think it was 2017, 18, and 19, we got alerts or notices after the elections from the then chair, signed by the entire committee, of ballots, as I think Tiffany just pointed out, that were disqualified. I think at the time maybe there were up to 2 votes were allowed, but 3 were put down on the ballot. Some of these elections, by the way, I think 2019, were within 4. All 3 candidates were within 4 votes. And so my question is, and maybe some of us have had a change of heart, what kind of curing was going on a ballot where 3 candidates or 2 candidates and a write-in were checked? Were those folks called and said, did you mean these 2 or these 2? I mean, did we do any of that at the time? Because it didn't appear. It was kind of a fact that these were disqualified. And this is in writing, and I think, as Tiffany put it, because I've done some research as well, you can find these notices and these letters from past election committee members. So it goes beyond the envelopes, the curing matter, and we should just be aware of that. The other thing is, we talk about being a small village where state and county laws and regulations shouldn't really apply. I mean, we let folks vote here that aren't citizens, which I wholeheartedly support, but we seem to pick and choose. I'm all for election security and ballot box security, but if we don't want to always apply state and county regs to what we do here because we want that flexibility, we shouldn't point to those regulations and saying that the VMA office is not up to code or standard of those state regs. I agree an independent ballot box is not great, but these are just reactions I have to not foster maybe a 1030 more discussion, but it's something that stood out to me. And finally, my final point, and I come to this every single time, I call for civility during these conversations. I understand emotions are continuing to run high, but tone matters, words matter, and regardless of how you feel about the process or how we arrived to this point, hyperbolic language does not help. And using words like eunuch and grow some balls, phrases like growing some balls, not good. And comparing this election committee to forced labor camps in China, also not helpful to the debate here that we're trying to have. As a son and grandson of Holocaust survivors and some that perished, I take that very personally. I don't like throwing around words and phrases like that casually, and I understand, again, people feel very strongly here, but give me a break. That's over the top. So I want to thank again, like others have, this election committee and all the hard work, and George multitasking. I mean, he's single-handedly taken on the doing the minutes. I mean, they're again, their hearts are in the right place. They're trying to do their best, and the council will do the same. We will do our best and hopefully come to an election plan that will make everyone happy and proud and have a great election this year. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Marty, Larry, are those new hands up or are those still up from prior comments?
I think Marty's was new, I think. So, yeah, Larry took his down, so.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I agree, and I hope I've been still this evening. I think I have been very cordial, because I do appreciate how much work is involved, probably better than most people. I just want to say that I do think that in terms of the Dropbox, the security of the election really is an issue now in a way it wasn't. Susan Kahn's point is well taken. The majority of absentee ballots came to the P.O. box, not to an untended, unsupervised ballot box in the office. And in some ways, those were simpler days. And I think that there was a level of I don't want to say trust, but confidence. And anyway, I would not recommend going back to an unsupervised ballot box ever again in this village. The state and county regs do apply. Our ballot box really is not secure. And I think the key point there is I don't want to put the staff on the spot. If anything did happen, I mean, it's got a little tiny lock on it, a little wooden box. If anything happened, poor Niles and Martha Fessenden, I mean, people would be like, really upset and would blame them, even though it probably wouldn't be their fault. I'm sure it wouldn't be their fault. So again, I don't want to put the staff at risk here. I think we need to be very cognizant of what position we're putting the staff in. And I also want to say that your point about, Tiffany's point about legislative language is sort of off the point because the proposals that have been submitted in all the prior years were legislative language. One thing I didn't have is a format. I like the numbering down the side. That legislative format is good. But the previous proposals, the December 16th plan, was legislative language, as were the previous umpteen election plans. So that really is off the point. And I want to finally pick up on Susan Kahn's point about really every neighborhood counts, and we should be looking here at how to make this election as voter-friendly and candidate-friendly as possible. And I really encourage the removal of any obstacles. You know, simple election procedures are a best practice. And you've got a clear roadmap here. And I would thank you for doing a specific vote on each of these items and on any other recommendations people have. Because I think the community confidence at this point has been shaken by the process. Those resignations resonated through the community. And the level of trust needs to be reestablished. And at this point, really, it's up to the council to do that. So Andrew, Katie, all the council members, I really thank you for taking time at this next meeting on the 17th to really go through and vote on each item, because I think that's going to be really essential to rebuild confidence here that we are going to have a really good, solid election, which I think we can. I think adopting those recommendations really would give us a very good election plan, not just an adequate one, but a good one. And I thank you for taking the care to do that. One final technical detail. Yes, Andrew, ballots have been disqualified in the past, but never for an envelope problem. We had a couple of ballots disqualified where people voted for 3 when you can only vote for 2. And the reason for that is logical. The law requires you as an election official to make every reasonable attempt to ascertain the voter's intent. When people have voted for 3 people, the election committee cannot go back to people and say, which 2 did you really mean? You can't do that legally. So that's why those ballots were disqualified. You can't do it. You can't guess, and you can't check with them. And in those cases...
But, I mean, I don't want to be devil's advocate here. First of all, I don't think there were envelopes at the time because these were still in person.
Right, and so there was no way to identify who had voted for 3, and when there were only 2 slots, there was no way to do it. And under the law, the committee is not allowed to to guess which 2 of the 3 you want. The only other votes that we ever disqualified, at least during my many years on the committee, was if people voted for, like, Sully Sullenberg got a vote one year, and we said, regrettably, he's not a resident, therefore not eligible. And I think Hillary Clinton got a vote one year, and we had to disqualify that vote as well. But we reported them all. And in no case it was a matter of an envelope. I mean, it was not about something that could have been easily remedied.
But there weren't envelopes at the time. So
And
that's
Marty,
correct.
It's sounding more like a conversation that would be better served at the counting on the 17th, because it sounds like it's getting into the heart of the election plan that is part of the agenda for the council meeting. So I'd ask both of you to please consider if that would be a more appropriate forum for this conversation.
To be continued, and thank you again for paying attention. It does matter, and we really appreciate it. Thank you. Good night.
Katie?
Oh, sorry, everyone. I know we're pushing it into the 3-hour territory. I just wanted to say that I went back through the emails of all the past weekly wrap-ups that were the call for candidates, and I'd be happy to email them to you so you have some templates. I know I'm an email hoarder. Don't get my husband started on it. But I noticed, like, the last election, the March 5th one, you were talking about the number, the word count. And I read it, it just said, for candidate statements should be limited to one single-spaced 8.5 by 11 page using 12-point font. So last year there was no word count. I can go back and find them all. This is when being an email hoarder is really helpful.
Katie, that's a good catch. That is my mistake then. I thought last year we had gone with a word count, not a page limit.
So yeah, there was no word count, but I mean, I really think it might sound insignificant to bring it up, but the call for the nomination, I mean, that's the start line, really. I mean, that's where you get the community interest. I mean, I think people who are intending to run have been, reading the plans, but that's your advertisement to the community, for people to run. So it's very important to just to consider that. So I can send you the various templates, and would love to see what you all come up with. So
Yeah, Katie, that would be a huge help. I'm sure. Yeah, I know I would appreciate it. I'm sure Leah and Paul would also appreciate having those as reference materials.
all right, I'll get them to you tomorrow. You're welcome, and I'm gonna tell Steve it's good that I'm in the email order. That's my husband.
You can quote me on that one. I'm happy to take your side on that as someone else who is an email hoarder. Are there any other resident comments? Okay, so it is 10:32, as Katie pointed out. We have pushed into the 3-hour thing, but I move to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
I second it.
I second.
All in favor? Aye.
All right. I'm just going to end the meeting for all, so nobody has to do anything. So,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.